see the roses, walk the beaches, and go out and have a bit of a run or a bit of a meeting with our loved ones, because that's just allowing us to calibrate our senses from being, sitting at the desk and being on meetings online 24/7. So what we want to also expand on is this term of smart tourism. It's not necessarily a dichotomous yes or no. It is one where there is, I would argue, and for many as well, a spectrum of levels where you have early adopters, late adopters, and so on. And even within the different sectors that we are engaging with, there are many different elements that we need to be mindful of as well in terms of technology enablers, how fast or stable the internet access is. There's still significant digital divide around the world. So when we're thinking of internet connectivity, we're really preaching to those 20% of people who have stable and fast, high-speed fiber optics. The rest of the world could just be coming to terms with this level of internet connectivity, especially when we look at a tourism, hospitality, events industry that potentially in some countries, 70% or more are small to medium operators in areas that are regional and remote, and the infrastructure is not there yet. So it will take generations or decades before there is this catching up of speed, and that's not too different to how we think about industry training right now. Many of us are very familiar with the likes of Facebook and Instagram, and now moving into spaces like TikTok and many others. Industry are only starting to perhaps be trained and to realize the potential or reaping what is a return on investment on some of these tools, and not necessarily then articulating the landscape around the notion of what does Facebook bring in terms of my business, but it is more a return of engagement and creating that awareness and resourcing to get people to know about your product and to create that interest level should obviously international borders start to reopen. And we see that from this month, many countries around the world are starting to reconnect and re-engage with the international visitor market, which is very fascinating from a smart tourism perspective, because now literally you're competing with every other destination to try and pull in the international visitor of your choice.
Aaron.
Yes.
The keyword digitally detoxed environment, which is very fancy.
Yes.
Yeah, it's addicted, but it's a better word, digitally detoxed.
Yes.
In my case, these days, I don't much go into Facebook, comparing the past time. I feel like I'm free out of something, addicted and digitally detoxed environment. It's better. But however, in order to promote or advertise our academic work and activities, I have to anyway log in Facebook, and then I sharing my information to the community. So yes, somehow I can't control myself digitally detox the environment out of me. But however, anyway, already it's very main source of the advertisement channels, and then know each other and getting each other, interaction each other. So that's what I'm now doing in the situation.
Thank you for that. I think there are definitely some tensions in that space where we try to obviously give ourselves that time to space out and read a book, or just play with the kids if you've got family or pets or whatever. But you're right, and I think because of the nature of our industry and the dissemination of knowledge is quite key, Facebook and many other platforms like LinkedIn become the new professional digital identity. And so while we try and maintain that kind of balance on work and personal life, this digital identity is there 24/7, and people park information there, disseminate information there, and create that vibe or awareness around the work that we do. And each of us will find the balance at a different point in time. And likewise as well, I think as we move into this new era where more and more are starting to look at these platforms over other subscription-based platforms to disseminate their work, we start to see them pop up in terms of being able to do so, and we are aware that subscription-based platforms, so accessing things like journal articles and so on, is quite costly for any library or institution for that matter. So I'm quite happy as well, and a bit of a segue where Prof. Khoo's Journal of Smart Tourism Research opens up that avenue as well for people to be able to access some of this leading edge, cutting edge type of research to a wider audience than clearly some of the subscription-based journals as well. Just moving to the next slide. So what I wanted to do was to go a bit of fact finding as I started to think about this topic of smart people and how we actually train or get them. So I went around on a bit of a desktop research and also spoke to a few of the program coordinators who actually have this in their curriculum. And to my surprise, I counted probably less than 10 institutions that had this smart tourism curriculum in English. So there could be others, as we mentioned, might be existing in, say, Korean or Chinese or Spanish or French and so on. But when I started to look at the curriculum, I noted some interesting patterns. So these 4 that you see on the screen were curated from places in the US, in Europe, mostly in these 2 continents. I haven't seen much yet in Australia, New Zealand. I started to engage more with Asia and spoke to some distinguished professors who were very much leading research centers in this space. And what I saw is still that notion where smart tourism, digital literacy skills were being developed for the students, right? So when you look at the 4 images there, you have things like defining smart tourism and what it is, the layers and the domains, looking at how we use smart tourism as methods and research collection tools, looking at ways where smart tourism technologies can be part of the landscape and how we use management principles to leverage on smart tourism opportunities for destinations. And these are quite common. So I looked at the resources available, and it's obviously quite brief because many institutions don't pack the entire 12 or 15-week curriculum in there. And I wrote to them and I said, if you don't mind, but obviously in that space, the notion of people working with one another or with robots and technology and big data is at the heart of smart tourism, which we saw earlier in the ecosystem. So do we actually teach those skills in this smart tourism framework or curriculum? And I got some very interesting replies to say we recognize that is quite crucial. However, at the moment, we are trying to just uplift the skill sets around the tourism curriculum to ensure that the students have digital literacy skills to prepare them for the future. And I can fully understand where they were coming from as well, but they recognize that in the space of 15 weeks, sometimes, or 12 weeks, depending on how long your semesters are, it's quite hard to actually incorporate those, I guess, more novel soft skills, human resource facets within there as well, which made me think, what do we need to actually have the smart people? Is it just about digital technologies, or is it about also working in that kind of environment? And what does the human resource theories have to say to us about those new landscapes? So I was supported in some of this resourcing in a Spanish institution that had this kind of scoping review of curriculum, and they asked their students, based on your technology / smart tourism curriculum, what is being offered, and they provided quite a good useful snapshot, remembering the data was 2018, so some things may have changed since then. But most of them had tourism, e-commerce as part of that as well, technology. There's a compulsory, some optional choices, and on average about 1.78 courses, maybe about 2 courses in that regard for technology / smart tourism type of offerings. what was interesting is when they probe students to say, well, how strong or good are your skills? You start to see that skepticism of the students to say, I'm not necessarily adequately prepared for smart tourism futures just yet. And we understand where, the table on the right showing you the distribution of where they see their skill sets, word processors like Microsoft Word and Notepad and so on, database management, so that also includes things like your Excel and PowerPoint and so on. Those things can be probably taught over the course of a curriculum. As we start to move down those ranking, we also see where potentially GIS, big data, things of the metaverse don't necessarily get enough focus or inputs into the curriculum, or at the point where they are, it could be at a very cursory level. So potentially it is a way for us to reflect how we embed these tools into the curriculum across the 3 years, and allowing students to be very familiar with what they do so that they too can stand into industry employability and thinking about how they might contribute in terms of the future landscape of smart tourism and the desires or the requirements needed for digital futures. So again, when we look at the labels as well, and I'll be, I guess, interested if some of you are thinking about replicating some of these studies and propositions within your own landscapes in Korea or whichever country you might be in, to see if these things have evolved over the last 3 years. The pandemic has taught us a lot about digital resourcing, but whether or not it's actually lifted the digital capability is a lot of unknown, and I'm still going on that fact-finding mission to find out, where these things are, and not surprisingly, when we look at the smart tourism resources or courses in Spain, we start to see how it is dominated, if you look at the frequency column, by areas around ICT and informatics, around big data analytics, and those are important fundamental skill sets to get students in the industries ready to embrace how to leverage on these opportunities for informed decision making. But what then we probably haven't yet talked about, and to my surprise, is the notion of smartness, which is the second row that you see on the screen. It was only mentioned just once, and I think this offers us an opportunity to really unpack what do we mean by smartness in terms of intelligent systems, and what are the, I guess, consequences or repercussions for us as we design the workforce for the future, which is an interesting perspective in Spain as a fairly popular tourism destination when we think of the likes of Madrid or Barcelona and many of the other Mediterranean regions too.
Aaron,
yeah,
back to the previous slide.
the slide. Yes.
I would like to mention these keywords based on your slide. You categorize very well smartness, digital marketing, and social media, IT, informatics, and database analysis, big data, and GIS, GDS, something like that.
Yep.
Which is overally IT, ICT.
Correct.
Based on the theory, semiotics and semiology. They said the meanings and namings consist of the concept. So in my view, smart is the arising from technology and arising from engineering and arising from science, even further psychology and philosophy. So ultimately, from the philosophy to the science to the engineering and then technology together. So I think those four large concepts converge into smart. So smart is covering from that boundary, and then we call that is smartness, intelligence, and digital was. So its meaning is very similar and concept is similar.
Yes.
So I think there is what we call now smart and smart tourism. There is definition I explained to the students.
And I think you hit on an important point, Chumo, that often the smart tourism courses are sitting in business schools or IT schools that are primed by academics and scholars from those disciplines. And I honestly would welcome a refreshing change to how these curriculum are more interdisciplinary or sits across research institutes or think tanks, where you've got the ability to look at semiotics and the whole landscape of philosophical underwritings to the curriculum. Because at the moment, it is what you see on the screen, IT systems overlaid into tourism and yet measured in IT ways. So this classification is one way to do it, but it's not the only way. And increasingly understanding the human side of smart tourism becomes very important too.
Yes. Actually, it's a very primitive the textbook. We haven't defined yet the coverage and meanings from the previous keywords, like what you explained and what you categorize on this slide, but which is very important to us, because as students we don't understand very well what the meaning is different each other, and sometimes smart, sometimes digital, sometimes social media, sometimes informatics or whatever. But actually it's a very, very enlarged, it's understandable each other, connecting to the digital and IT.
Yeah, and that's one of the things as well. Perhaps a timely consultative framework or investigation into research around what should and will it look like from the different stakeholders in terms of the curriculum, and that's probably quite needed now as different countries jump on this bandwagon as well. So just moving on to the slide, we will have time to look at this as an activity too. I propose some reasons why these courses are minimalistic across different countries and disciplines of what they're teaching in that smart tourism curriculum. One, lack of faculty, and this is one of the barriers that I've mentioned as well. Very few people enter the academia possessing the full suite of smart tourism, because it's, generally speaking, a younger topic where many of the established scholarship has been around for 30 to 40 years with things that are pre-Facebook, and now obviously familiarizing with that. And so this might be one area where we need to open up conversations around what does faculty look like, because that's where I make the case that potentially some of these resourcing or curriculum or the philosophical underpinnings can be taught by people in industry as part of adjunct faculty. And I think we need to think about the global classroom here, that even for myself, I don't have all the answers in that space. And I have reached out to people who are industry practitioners or who are running this level of active role in the metaverse to be able to teach the curriculum that probably I'm not in the best position to do so. The second one is the constraints. It can be perceived as very costly and inaccessible, largely because big data is expensive, and we understand that in some cases, unless it's publicly available, created by government sectors, it can be very expensive to actually undertake. I'll use a few examples of why some of these resourcing, when you put together the capital and the social capital needed to actually develop this from scratch, they can be quite challenging to actually do or undertake, particularly for institutions that are maybe not as well endowed as others in terms of this landscape. So that the partnership is quite key when we want to leverage on smart tourism and human resource futures. And then the complexity. I often ask, we can always assess based on the curriculum that you saw because it's easy to do so. Has the student demonstrated digital literacies, being able to develop a social media website? Tick. Can they measure returns on engagement by the number of likes and the number of posts on Instagram? Tick. But what does smart tourism competencies look like, and how do we assess this very, very fast evolving landscape? And that's a huge ask from a single piece of assessment. And potentially we may need to rewrite assessments around what we call integrated curriculum and measuring the whole process through journals, through videos, through reflections, all the way through to the outputs in the third or the fourth year, depending on the number of years you spend at university, to be able to put together a very comprehensive understanding of what exactly are we trying to assess. And the last one is this notion of, I guess, hesitancy, as I call it, the widespread application and receptivity. Again, as we mentioned previously, where different countries are, where different sectors are, they may have heard of the term smart tourism futures, but they may not necessarily have the appetite for it because they could be dealing with other broader issues around things like health crisis, getting small and medium businesses back on board following the pandemic, because many of them have decided that it's not financially viable to actually start their business again. So there are definite challenges, and it's not going to be an overnight success. It will take time for us to actually get into terms with some of these as a long-term investment through possibly a collaborative framework or agencies across different countries as well. So what I want you to do is to look at smart human resources and have a think about some of these questions. So I'll park the, if you've got your mobile devices with you or using your laptop or PC, please use the QR code or the Menti code, because you are able to then go along with me as we think about some of these ways to maybe put in your thoughts around some of the contents that we've discussed so far. So what I'll do is I'll stop sharing and put the link into the chat so that many of you will be able to join with me. So I'll be able to show your response as well. I will put the link here. So that's the website, menti.com, and there's a code that you need to put it in there, 9423, and the last 4 digits are 5015. Okay.
We get in there?
Yeah, you can go to this website now.
Okay.
And then when you are on the website, www.menti.com, they will prompt you for a code to enter. So you use the code 9423 5015.
942
3 5015.
Okay.
Cool. And you would be able to then see my screen where you've got the questions that are prompting you to do so. I'm just going to share my screen. So you will see my screen and there's a question there. When you are looking at the screen, the question will give you options. So you can key in options. So the question that I asked, there are 3 questions there. This is the first question. What skill sets are needed to reap the potential of smart tourism? So as many of you are typing your responses, I can see the number of people answering on the bottom right-hand corner. So 4 people have responded. So it's a simple tool. Menti is a way where you can get live audience responses to questions as well, and it's free. So I'll give a bit more time for people. I think there's about a dozen or more of you here. So you are able to then put your responses in.
I did.
Thank you. So wait a while for other people. and it's quite fun to then look at what you've written versus what other people have written and think about this. And I think for me as well, I use this in class to ask different types of questions and get students to actually articulate some of these points or some of these ideas, which perhaps brings a fresh perspective to what we think about from smart tourism in this context and what other people think about. I'll give you, another minute or so to finish this off, and then we'll look at other questions.
Ask potential. Do we need to type a keyword again?
Yeah, if you're finished, you should see another question pop up. Have you seen the second question on your end, or just the same one?
It's the same one.
The same one. So you can type as I think up to 3 keywords that I created as options. So it's up to you. You can use 1 keyword or 2 different keywords or 3. It's up to you.
Okay.
So what we can do is once you're done is I'll press H on my end. Let me just go to my slide. So this is where people are starting to type their responses. So you can see as the words, it forms like a word cloud. The bigger the words, the more common people actually mention that, or its derivative. And it is quite interesting that how we also see our similarities or differences to the things that we've mentioned over the past couple of minutes around skill sets, right? So for many of us, as we are speaking, the key importance here is the skill set of data analysis. And for sure, those are the fundamental things of us reflecting on what we actually need in terms of knowing how to deal with big data or smart data and representing that in knowledge as well. But what I'm also interested to actually see from many of you in discussing this is the notion of visualizing how we present that information in a way that's understandable by industry. So, and maybe this is just something that we've observed. Not everyone in the industry may have had the opportunity to finish a degree in tourism, or for that matter, engage in smart tourism. So we need to be able to produce the information that they understand, and coming down to a level where it creates some opportunity for business investment or informed decision making. So thank you for this, and I'm quite happy to again share this with Prof. Koo so that he can also show this to the rest of the students or the rest of it. But it is fascinating because this code that you use can continue to generate inputs as well. So this is the first slide as well. Yep. Okay. So nice. So it's one way to look at that information. Now, what you also will do is now you will be able to see a different question on your page. So this is the second question. This is a self-reflective question. To what extent do you possess these skills for smart tourism? So asking ourselves whether or not we actually have these skill sets. Strongly disagree to strongly agree. So this is a scaled question. So you can move the scale and see for ourselves based on a typical curriculum whether or not we have those skill sets as well. So a bit of a self-reflection question here.
Wow. Mentimeter. Okay.
It's a free resource, so you can create an account.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you for sharing this good
That's
tool.
all right. That's all right. Many of us will be familiar with things like Kahoot, which is more of a quiz, but Mentimeter looks at audience responses and in real time. Because it creates more interaction as well. Not just me talking, but you can also do some things on your end. So we've got about 10 responses in there.
I don't.
And I will show results. Oh, interesting. This one's very fascinating.
Very well. People, they obsessed the keyword computing and technical skills for enhancing the smart tourism.
Yeah, because
but actually, so far through my personal experience about smart tourism, we definitely we need computing, technology such as crawling method and visualizing, but which is not familiar to the social science students. However, service science is kind of a conceptual design for implementing the actually in order to realize the smart tourism. So service science is also very important. But those parts actually should be interdisciplinary, subject, and we need faculty members from there.
Yes, and that's the other consideration here is potentially the redesign of the curriculum involves these faculty members, but also what are the workload implications and the resourcing enabling these things to occur? Because often, as I can see, and you're right, Chumo, this particular self-reflection survey or short questions as well on a scale is essentially a reflection on where we are as a discipline or as a curriculum. Because typically from a business school or a science school, technology and computing skills are without doubt part of the digital futures. Students should graduate with these skills. But we also have curriculum around marketing, around how to develop and design research projects, around service design and systems thinking. But as you can see, those three, which are, I guess, lagging behind: crisis risk management, accounting for the smart tourism, human resource, those things tend to be left within aspects that may or may not be part of the curriculum at present. So if we are able to circle on those areas where we think we have shortfalls, potentially this is where we may want to open up what we consider as elective courses to enable students and practitioners to develop those skill sets around them. And that's not areas that we've seen as well. So crisis management for smart tourism. I haven't actually come across anyone actually teach that. I know of crisis management around COVID, around war, around natural disasters, etc. I haven't actually seen anyone build resilience into smart tourism curriculum yet. So, for example, what happens when hacking or deviant behavior occurs in smart ecosystems? How do we prevent or manage those risks? I haven't, up to this day, I was talking to so many people and they're like, we haven't gone down that path yet. Now it's all about cybersecurity and so on, but this is talking about ecosystems at large. The whole world of blockchain and cryptocurrencies, right? So how do we actually see that as well? Oops, just screen's just opening.
Yeah, it's true. After COVID-19, actually we should measure the COVID effect negatively. But anyway, we need to analyze it by data-driven, approach, and then we need to visualize that data-driven, result for users, and then we make a decision how much the COVID effect actually influence to the DMO or industry or even consumers. So crisis and risk management is not alone. It's a part of the smart tourism.
Yes, and therefore the pressing need, I suppose, is to this kind of accounting and even human resource thoughts around, well, if curriculum doesn't necessarily capture the core elements in the current curriculum, then how do we get the smart people that we need into the near future? So my last question then for you is, if we talked about, you know, the landscape, we talked about us, but the key question here is, well, if it's not in our current curriculum, then who should teach this? And again, on your screens now, you can vote on where you think this curriculum should be taught by, other than technology tools.
It's exclusive.
Yes, I think it's just a one or the other.
Okay. Let me. Yeah, I'm a university professor, so I think the university should. You know what? I've been involved in several projects in Korea at this moment. I've been working with Vietnam Hue project. We import and export the concept of smart tourism to Vietnam and Hue. So we've been to the Vietnam last week, and we try to implement the concept of smart tourism to the Hue and Debian Island. And also we're working with the computer science guys. So visual Q&A. So KVK is a knowledge visual Q&A.
It's good.
But so far through that kind of the practical project with the companies, they have somehow their know-how and their skill set. But however, they not much plenty of time to preparing for the completely to the design level. So somehow we have to provide the concept and knowledge and boundary and the theoretical approach to them. So that's the role of our smart tourism project at this moment with companies.
And I think that kind of a blended learning outcome is important. And as I review the responses to this question, I think that is a very important stage that what you've just done, because many today are almost seeing industry with that we assume that the students will finish naturally have the skill sets other than technology to be ready for the jobs of the future. But what you just explained is that this level of upskilling or reskilling becomes quite important, because we can't leave industry to expect them to do on-the-job training all the time. Universities have obviously a curriculum to deal with, and there are different, I guess, constraints or influences on what goes into the curriculum depending on business schools and where you are. But this level of coursework plus internship model is what has worked, and I'm using internship very broadly, not just physical work on-site type of internships, but internships as also a way to look at projects, look at campaigns, look at ways to galvanize other countries in that space as well. So thank you all for your inputs, and I'll stop sharing on this one, and I'll circulate these results back to Prof. Khoo, who will be able to also share this with the rest of your cohorts and with many others, because incidentally, for a topic like this, the timing is now to be able to look at the contents in that space. So I'll just go on to the slides.
I impulsively, I will capture that result from your experiment, and I will share that the information to the Facebooks, how our students consider the smart tourism, and your questions. It's very valuable.
Thank you.
And like it's up-to-date information.
It is, and getting that kind of inputs as well, because the notion of why I'm asking those questions around smart people or smart human resources, the topic of smart human or strategic human resources is not new. When we think about human resource management strategy and practices operating within different international and local contexts, that principle and fundamentals haven't really changed. What we want to absorb and to participate of in that red dotted line that I've put in the screen are the changes that smart tourism ecosystems have on our recruitment strategies, our appraisal strategies, our evaluation, reward systems, because we are now dealing with a workforce that is so global, so diverse in terms of its levels of digitization, that we need to maybe tweak some of those principles in a way that supports us as a global business in operating within a metaverse. So the interesting one, and some of you might think of, is places like Google. And Google's got a very diverse workforce, people working from home at the offices around the world. And how do we then evaluate the overall performance of people with such diverse job scopes? That's a very challenging question that businesses now have to ask themselves, because are we evaluating output? And how do we then evaluate one person's output with another, because they are now working on different elements of the metaverse? Are we evaluating the process? And that's even a bottomless pit, because different people think of productivity and outcomes quite differently. So this level of performance evaluation from human resource and smart people becomes very, very important today, more than ever before, since the pandemic has changed the way we work. This now also opens up conversations around smart tourism workforce and really unpacking some of those things. So if many of you eventually work to become tourism consultants or workforce people and culture type of practices, my challenge to you is looking at those understanding of the human resource model, which has existed for a long time, since the Industrial Revolution till now. But how does that actually change in a very fast evolving space? So this is a typical job advertisement when they're recruiting somebody with smart tourism skills. And if you look at this, I think this was out of Ireland in the UK, and they're looking at someone that they're hiring with the capacity to develop smart tourism analytics for a certain role. The job requirements are quite standardized, right? And we think when we write job advertisements as well, we ask the candidate or the chosen person should have at least some experience in this level of technology. Again, you tick data, skills, analytics, tick innovation across, whether it be tourism or otherwise, right? Not terribly different from what we come to understand in terms of skill sets. Awareness of smart tourism on the local economic recovery. This one's interesting. So the question then is, how do we make the case for this? How do we demonstrate that we know what we're talking about, and how does that manifest into economic recovery, depending on the regions that you're looking at? So this requires us to think about what we've mentioned previously on the indicators for success, or the returns on engagement or value. Experience as a key point to engage different audiences, technical and non-technical. And this is where Prof. Khoo's point here is, how do we articulate very technical, sometimes complex concepts to audiences who may or may not understand what exactly is smart tourism, what is it of interest to us. So the kind of skill sets to summarize, simplify, moving into posters or pamphlets or worksheets for industry, and I guess academic and non-academic audiences as well. Formal experience in project management, that's again where we see this is going. And again, the notion of exposure to data analytics and visualization. So these are some of the areas where I strongly would get you to think about as well. Maybe as you are into your second, third, final year before graduation, if you are thinking about upskilling or looking at skill sets to put in to make yourself more employable, there are tools now on LinkedIn or many of the other online learning or in your curriculum to be able to demonstrate that and put that into your CV or resume as well. There are also resources on preparing workforce for digital futures. So I like this OECD 2020-2021 review, because it came at a time where people are into the second or third wave of the pandemic. And it talks not just about the technology capabilities of the curriculum or what the smart people should possess as computing skills. It talks about agility. It talks about what we call ambidexterity around the hard skills and the soft skills of connections, problem solving, working with people and robots. And that for me is at the core of what smart people should be about, not just relating to able to look at data and analyze the data, but being able to communicate and relay that information to others in the metaverse, as well as to deal and work with robots. Right? We now are seeing a bit more of the research into how people feel about working with robots, and that's the nature of the workforce. Whether we like it, this human or non-human characters in the workplace become part of that as well. And I often ask students to reflect on this notion of emotional intelligence, right? We can be, I guess, emotionally aware of the needs of people in the workplace, but how many of us can read robots and their emotions? And we say, well, robots don't have feelings, but do they? It's our question. And that got people to think, right? If we are able to deal at that level, and certainly from the table, the Latvian, which is a Eastern Europe example here, is one where you could start to think about as well. And when you get this set of slides, I encourage you to click on the link which I have on the title of this slide. You can click on the OECD link, you will actually download the report, which is quite insightful to think about what does the tourism workforce need to do and work collaboratively with others in this metaverse.
Emotional intelligence.
It's one that I am aware of, and there's a better work around working with humans in the workplace for EI. But now when we're talking about smart futures, how do we, through this extra lens of technology, smart futures, communicate that with someone who is miles away from us?
Yeah.
So again, when we look at the OECD expected skill sets, which is what we were talking about earlier, data, computing skills around MS Office, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and many others, online communications, data literacy, content creation is how we articulate the ideas that we've got into simple forms. How we also then start to look at this over the big data and analytics as well. So where Prof. Koo talked about the information from Facebook and Twitter, and I often reflect as well. We don't necessarily go down the path of things of ethics and data that people may have put online, but haven't necessarily given full consent for it to be used as research or to be analyzed. So there is this interesting trade-off now where many of us are on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or any other types of social media platforms like TikTok, where this data is stored and captured by the backend API and yet being used for research processes. And we ask that questions around the security elements. Well, hold on, have we given access to it being research focused? Are we allowing this and the annotation of data or the anonymization of data is an interesting one, because in Europe in particular now, understanding the implications of the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, is huge in terms of its consequence of how we use and manage data. And this notion of privacy, it's very challenging because today, when we think of the pandemic, for many countries, you have things like QR codes. So you scan the QR code to say, I am visiting this restaurant or staying in this hotel for 3 days or 2 hours. That information is captured. But should that information be used for research, that's a very different proposition. And now it's almost global, right? Because when we are traveling, we are expected to have an international vaccine QR code or proof. Who's using that data? How will it be used for smart tourism? And do we get identified as a result of this? So there are very hard questions because this global ethics especially in the landscape of transparency for smart tourism and workforce, is for some countries a bit of a reflection and possibly even a barrier to participation.
About that point, actually, I'm proceeding a research paper work with my students, privacy risk and healthy risk, and then we are willing to open our, personal information through the QR code. It's interesting, research question, and then we are finding very interesting one. In Korea, a lot of people open their personal information due to government pressure, and innovatively in Asians in Korea and England and the United States is quite different about how expose their personal information with the COVID-19 situation. So there's a okay.
And you're right. I think this opening of borders now means that there's greater mobility across countries and regions, and that information is stored across years or decades because people are trying to track things like mobility, and it raises some of those questions around have we given informed consent, or have we given primary consent to be involved in those projects, which opens up that discussion for us as well. So where are we, and where does the skill shortage occur? So when we look at the different countries on the screen, this is a very European, I guess, South American perspective as well. These are just a snapshot of the different skills shortages. And again, we start to see many of them are still very much relating to the computing skills, VR, data management, analytics, and so on. And understandably so, right? When we think of these countries and many others in tourism, a lot of the operators are 24/7 busy with their work. They're running the promotion, the logistics, the supplies, putting people on the jobs, the vehicles, and they may not necessarily have thought about the opportunities from the digital skills. So we do a lot of workshops in an Australian context to tell people how to engage on Facebook, how to look at the notion of digital warehousing of information and leveraging that information. Many don't even collect that kind of data from the visitors and ask them, where are you from, or your postcodes that you're from, or where are you going to next. So this is really an expedited, I guess, pace in which we're trying to bring countries up to speed to the digital skills, and then obviously opening up that need at the same time for smart tourism understanding and participation, because these countries could be working collaboratively in the smart tourism ecosystem, especially in places like the EU, where it's almost a case that your passport allows you into another area without necessarily going through customs and checkpoints because you are an EU passport holder. Now that fast and open mobility allows for a lot of rich data, and I think this is an opportune time for us as thinking of the workforce into the future of how we may be able to track and obviously utilize that to the best of our abilities in trying to look at things like predictive behavior or future behavior from across the entire tourism experience. So being aware of the need to want to go on holidays, finding the travel information search online, and already that opens up the data points for what they're searching for, when they're traveling, who they're traveling with, where are they going, what are they doing in those countries, where are they going to if it's a multi-country holiday. And those become very important data sources for us to think about this kind of collaborative smart tourism futures. So it is quite interesting, and I think if I can encourage you to look at global trends in Korea and beyond, to look at this whole landscape is fast shifting, and having that kind of first mover advantage becomes important for us in managing the skill sets and the workforce of the future. What do we want to do is also to create the kind of work environments to support what I term as smart people, right? Championing not just based on merit, but based on the culture of digital leadership. And that's a tool or keyword here that I'm starting to grapple with as well. What does digital leadership mean? I understand leadership from a human resource, from a managerial context or concept, but digital leadership is fascinating, and I'm starting to read a bit more. And at the end of my slides, there is a news article from the Harvard Business Review that I encourage you to just get your hands on. They talk about digital futures as managing the landscape around talent management and talent acquisition. So bringing the right people in, looking at the value-based culture on the first column there, that you want to be able to put people together who have the ability and the ability to also communicate with one another around that value-based digitalization culture. And that's very important because the workforce is so diverse. The work environment and job scope is quite different than ever before. And so this level of competencies and skills training is fascinating. I speak to a lot of my colleagues and many others who teach into human resource, and they say, this is the black box of human resource management in the future. They use the word black box because it is one where it is very contextualized. It is one that is quite different. It covers things like international business. It covers things like training and rewards. It covers things like incentives, as we see in there as well. And operationally too, how do we take real-time feedback from people in the workforce on board to enhance or optimize our smart systems? So whether they are people in housekeeping, wait staff, kitchens, managers, leaders in the field, airports, if someone has an idea, how are they able to, in real time, maybe through an app or through some notice boards online, put that up and get people to think about some of these opportunities as well? Right? There could be digitization of those tools.
My case, I have a lot of students under my supervision, and even Smart Tourism Research Center, Smart Tourism Education platform. When I send out some information through the email or the instant messaging, whatever, some students reply instantly and then be ready.
Yes.
Majority of the students are just quiet and even not reply to me at all. So I'm looking at that attitude, and an attitude is quite related to the competence. So I can be able to identify who and what they has the competence related to their work.
And one of the things as well you pointed out as well, this national or corporate culture. If you look at the heading of this table, the context is in Germany. And Germany has been a country that we would associate with quality improvements. They're not so sometimes overly concerned about the style. They just want the tool to be able to work. And their focus or sometimes obsession with this level of quality improvements translates to things like the way they design their cars, the way they design their retail sector, the way they design buildings. That functional quality improvement is what they're looking for here. So that's why I think having the open line of quality enhancements around how we enhance the work environment of the future becomes quite important here, because it's no point someone telling you a feedback of something that has occurred 9 months ago when it is more timely for you and I to know that information in real time and act on it in real time, because clearly that has ramifications to the way the operations are today or tomorrow. So this was something that I thought about as well, the national culture around this work environment and how people or places start to think about this kind of future smart people.
Yeah.
So I've mentioned a little bit of this, and coming to the end of my presentations are some of the tools that I wanted to bring to our understanding as well. There are ways that we can, I guess, exhibit some of the smart tourism education and training, which I've started to think about a lot more. through things like gamification, getting people to play games and simulating that in different contexts. Scenario planning, what does this look like for us 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road? The use of simulations and visualizations, so open big data forums or platforms to be able to do that. And obviously the wider element of systems thinking. When I change this, what happens in the system? So these are some of the different tools to enable us to incorporate that across the different kinds of smart tourism futures and workforce scenarios, for example. I wanted to elaborate on them a little bit. So this is an example, and I'll play just a short bit of this. During the pandemic, New Zealand actually co-created games to get people to think about the landscape of getting people into the country, and New Zealand are only opening up their borders in the next couple of months to the rest of the world. They partnered with a famous game influencer, and she talked about how the use of games has been able to get people interested about the landscape of coming to play in New Zealand. And this is a platform that they use, which was on Twitch. So I'll play this short video for you, and hopefully you can hear the audio and look at this as well. It's fascinating that destinations co-create with the gaming industry, which was huge in the time of COVID. So have a look at what she's actually then developed and articulated as a result of gamification and play.
Oh, no sound.
No sound.
Please click on the sound.
Yep. I will move my sound again. Just give me a minute and share my screen again. Give me a minute. Share my screen.
No sound.
Still no sound. Okay, I will go to the
go to the Zoom, and you can click the sound.
Yeah, it's probably my computer on my end. That's not a problem. I will just play it off the YouTube website itself. It's probably easier. Just give me a minute. Let me share my screen. On the website, and hopefully you can hear it now.
No.
Can I give an advice about how it might work?
Yep.
There's a menu on top of your screen. There should be a menu, and there's on the very end it says options, and when you click on it, it says there should be sound sharing. Usually,
I think what is picking up sound is from my speaker, which is weird. I will try it again. Otherwise, I'll just put the link.
Sharing the link to me. I will turn on here.
Sure. Yeah, I think I'm finding that it's not picking up the sound. I put the link in the chat now.
Okay.
So potentially, if you can screen, it's just about 2 minutes anyway. Yeah. So if you wanted to share that on your end, please go ahead. I'm sorry that it's just not picking up audio.
Tourism campaign, perfect for a pandemic. In lockdown, gaming shot up 70% as people rushed online.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. show it?
Yep.
Tourism campaign, perfect for a pandemic. In lockdown, gaming shot up 17% as people rushed online for a hit of adventure and escape. Coincidentally, the very thing New Zealand offers in troves. So Tourism New Zealand decided to market the country like a video game.
Sorry, Chumo, we're looking at your Mentimeter screen.
Can you hear?
I can hear, but I think your screen is the one on Mentimeter.
Oh, sorry.
That's
okay. Okay, let me do this again. Okay. It's okay.
Took viewers on a series of quests across the nation.
Do it again. Okay.
I think you probably need audio.
We should. What the heck?
For a head of adventure.
Okay.
Yep.
Coincidentally, the very thing New Zealand offers in troves. So Tourism New Zealand decided to market the country like a video game. Play NZ. The first ever gamer walkthrough of a country. Play NZ took viewers on a series of quests across the nation. To launch, we recruited one of Australia's top gaming influencers. Play NZ. Let's boot this bad boy up. Let's go. You're forward. Oh, I'm crouching. Partnering with Twitch, she introduced Play NZ and some of New Zealand's attractions to thousands in a live event, with a little help from Kiwi movie star Julian Dennison.
I'm the narrator. It's the first of its kind of a gamified walkthrough of New Zealand.
Millions more watched on YouTube, with trailers pushing them to an interactive web experience where immersive 180-degree videos highlighted New Zealand's people, places, and culture. The experience left an adventure-starved audience wanting more. Thousands wished the game was real, and the press couldn't get enough either.
Chumo, if you don't mind, can you pause that and
Okay.
talk a little bit about it? So
Okay.
this was interesting for me from a workforce perspective, because clearly the country was in lockdown and everyone obviously were thinking, how do I interact and engage with my potential followers and get them interested in New Zealand? So working with game designers, game developers, and social media influencers allowed them to think about their workforce as not being those who they just are in their salary or in their company, but the workforce was very much a collaborative approach. That when we looked at the case that of the video of Play NZ, and you can look at the case study, it's a fascinating case study because you could do a lot of adventure quests around there. It's almost like Lord of the Rings, if you like, in a game form. And it got people to play and got people interested. I must say that it's also changed the way they think about this, because then they could see which were the more popular games, which were the more popular itineraries. And using that information, they're using this big data to be able to inform tourism planning and resourcing once the borders reopen, because they know that the people who are coming in will likely be those who are looking at some of those itineraries and journeys as well. So it got me really thinking about the opportunities for games as one part of the story that perhaps we can tap on more than ever before to be able to deliver the things that we want. So a bit of an interesting case study there, which I thought was part of the pandemic that we learned as well. So just going to fast forward. The other tool is what we call scenario planning. And often I do this with just a blank sheet of paper. I get students to even use the whiteboard and say, okay, this is where we are, and this is what we want to be, or where are the possible scenarios. And I ask them, right, based on those scenarios or sets of futures, where do you see us playing or managing, or the workforce implications based on those scenarios? And already A, B, and C, and D, you could start to pinpoint sections around things like greater technology in tourism, hospitality, events, or leisure, and so on. Another scenario would be the rise, and Prof. Khu has talked about this, the notion of wider or increasing number of health scenarios. What happens if another pandemic hits? How are we better prepared as a workforce to deal with those things? So you can start to use scenario planning as a very active tool. And I think my challenge to you is use the scenario planning of what smart tourism futures will look like and the implications on the future state of affairs. Because your scenario could be 5 years, 10 years, 30 years. It's really up to create, right? You could, and most of my observations now with the industry is they are looking at scenario futures for up to the year 2050. Okay, so that's another 28 years from now. But what happens when you're talking about tourism futures of, say, 2100? So almost another 100 years or 80 years from now, what will we be like? I know I won't be around, but what will it be like for many of our future generations to come? So essentially, it's also important to think about this from the workforce, right? Why do I say that? 2050, in another 28 years from now, ask ourselves, how old will we be? And who will be in the workforce in 2050? It is exactly the generation who will be born possibly today or in the next 5 years. If you have siblings or children or grandchildren, right, or adopted kids who are now aged between 1 to 7, these are the kind of generations that will be in the future workforce for 2050. I don't think we've given them a label yet. The moment we're talking about Gen Z and the millennials, I don't know what you call people born after 2020, right? The 20s? I have no idea. I haven't actually heard any labels given to
it's
them
not
yet.
your job.
It's not my job. It's not their job. But what is interesting for us to think about is, you know, what kind of workforce environments will it be like? And we're already looking at this, right? Here in the conversations in Australia. Driverless vehicles.
Okay.
Right? Air taxis. And the whole landscape about this whole future forward transport becomes fascinating. So it's just something for you to do, maybe, you know, as a workshop.
But the story is 100 years ago already.
That's right.
We know.
That's right.
Huh?
And so this kind of possible trajectories in another 50 years is fascinating as an ongoing thing as well. Simulations and visualizations. There are a few websites that you can go to. I use this in my teaching now for things like policy and planning and sustainability and technology futures in my courses. The website on climatecentral.org, and you could go to it in your own time, is one where you can click on a link and key in a city in the world, and you could look at the effect of temperature rising between 1 to 4 degrees and how soon we will see places go underwater. And how we plan around workforce and tourism futures. It's a fascinating tool. It's a free tool, and I get the students to think of scenarios for that as well. Tourism Tracer, developed out of the University of Tasmania through a friend of mine, Associate Professor Anne Hardy, traces the paths of tourists as they go through their holidays, where they go, how long they stay, the direction they take, and it's now been used across different cities. Hokkaido in Japan uses it, Skane in Sweden uses it, and so it's a fascinating piece as well about workforce and data analytics. How do we prepare our industry practitioners and people going to the digital futures as well? And to almost bring ourselves to a bit of a conclusion is this systems thinking, right? At the top there, I smiled when they used the word smart people. So this paper published this year looks at this notion of governance, infrastructure, mobility, environment, and economy. And I think it's a useful segue to overlay it to the work and the illustrious work done by Prof. Khu and other scholars in the smart tourism space. If you overlay this to the existing frameworks of smart tourism futures, I think it opens up that epistemological discussion and debates around semiotics, right? How do these things, when you overlay it to the existing smart tourism futures, what goes into that label of smart people? And my challenge to you and I is to really think about this mobility of people, the digital nomads of today and of the future, the infrastructure that we have, the governance and the models around it. How do we actually prepare for these kinds of futures that we want and the workforce that we want to embrace? Other questions, and this is where we start to reflect, right? Does a country have a pool of smart people it can draw from? If it is a very small population base, then the second question is important. What are the implications of importing smart people? Because it's their capacity building, right? What we call legacy planning, all right, succession planning as well. The third question is a question of resourcing. How much does it cost to hire smart people? If we want people to be in that space and being able to lead and manage and develop the culture of the future, how much are we prepared to pay them, and how will we have metrics around their work and the things of deliverables? And these smart people, given the Internet of Things, work like digital nomads. I've got a master student in that space of digital nomads. People can work from anywhere, not just work from home. But what are we trying to do to enable them to be able to flourish in their work environments wherever they are in Asia, Europe, Latin America, the Pacific, and so on and so forth? So already the HRM tools are there to enable smart processes and thinking. So obviously in the box on the top left-hand corner is emerging technologies, and we have that already in copious data points. And I asked that question about generational change, right? The employee generational change as well. What do we look at in terms of their work environments? Talent onboarding, the whole system around smart futures and talent development. I like this diagram because it captures the kind of tools that we need and the leadership in terms of organizational 4.0 capabilities. And as I speak, I think 4.0 is already being subsumed by organization 5.0 around this whole landscape of data management and informatics. So to conclude, and obviously giving time for the last 30 minutes or so for question and answers and discussions, we do need these smart people, and moving into these ecosystems of environments that we want. We've looked at what curriculum has or doesn't have at the moment, and therefore the need to go into this what we call a VUCA environment, very volatile, unpredictable, complex, ambiguous futures. We don't have all the answers in one spot, and the collaboration is quite key. The last point there that we are embracing now is not just the EQ and AQ, but I came across this new term of Foresight Quotient, FQ, when I had a tea with somebody a few weeks ago, being
FQ?
able to look at, yes, it's interesting.
FQ?
And I heard this, I'm like, what does FQ mean? Foresight Quotient, being able to predict the futures and think
I
about
use that
those futures.
word a lot before. FQ.
but having those kinds of interesting future perspective was interesting. I heard it, I was like, I have to write this down. I haven't heard this before. But essentially as well, right? For us and for me, for sure, how do the curriculum changes need to be reflective of this? The smart skills, not just the computing skills, but the soft skills. And who can we partner with? Because clearly in the constraints of time and a 3-year curriculum that has pretty much everything from a business skill set, who do we need to partner to deliver those outcomes as well? So I'll have time for question and answers, but this was the one that I encourage you to look at. It's looking at digital transformations and talent management, and they've embraced this very well. It's not just the technology skills or digital skills, but what are some of those talent management strategies that we need to have the smart people that we want. So thank you very much, and I will stop sharing and look at you so we have time to discuss those questions. Yeah. Thank you.
Wow, good, Aaron. I invented smart tourism. You reinforcing smart tourism. Good, very good. Very good. What's going on our textbook?
Yes, and I've tried to move that, and obviously with the book publishers themselves as well, they too also have looked at the curriculum. I think some of them are, I know of some editorial team that have been impacted with COVID. Sad news just last week, one of them who I work with had an editorial assistant who died from COVID.
Oh.
So they have to appoint someone else to be in there, and there's a backlog of work. So I truly empathize of what's going on right now around the world, and that while our lives are progressing as far as we can with some form of normalcy.
Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, it is.
Anyway, students, please feel free to ask you whatever you want to know from him.
Yeah, feel free to ask questions or have a chat around topics around this notion of smart workforce or smart tourism.
You know, the Australia students, they also quite. Okay.
I have a question, Dr. Aron. So thank you for the great presentation. As a student, in a few years, I will move to the job market, and then at the moment I will hired. There will be the moment that I should work with the people who study traditional tourism, and I studied the smart tourism. And then as a professor, how do you think we should like, how do we deal with the gap between us?
Yeah, and that's already a question in today's context that we are planning for, where the curriculum changes are reflecting a change of times. And I'm very pleased that Prof. Koo and many of you have the opportunity to learn about smart tourism. I can't even include too much of it in my course because we have a technology course that smart tourism is probably just 1 week, and in 1 week you can't really expand too much in there. But my awareness and observation is many of you also speak to your alumni, so your cohorts that have finished last year or the year before or the years that are now, to ask them, and I welcome their inputs too, because they are the first generation to work with the current landscape as well. So I invite them back and I say, well, you've graduated and you're now in industry. What does your workforce or your colleagues look like? So they share with me. I work with elderly people who have never gone to uni. I work with people who've gone to uni, have done other degrees, and you'll be surprised. Probably, this is an Australian context, about 48% of the people who work in tourism are not tourism background. So they've done degrees in finance, in engineering, in IT, in accounting, in banking, and they've gone into tourism because it was a career change or because they found a passion to do so. So that then opens up also where you may be able to kind of co-create the knowledge in their workplace. And my encouragement to all of you is we have a course called The Future of Work in our curriculum. It gives you a bit of a background into developing your digital portfolio. So things like your LinkedIn profile, if you haven't yet had one, I encourage you to create a LinkedIn profile. Some of the projects or assessments you've done, can you update that as a bit of your digital CV and share that with them? Because some of them will say, okay, for example, you've done a campaign on social media. Can you tell me what was it you learned? And many of them are really in the mood to learn because they don't have the time, they don't have the expertise to do so. And through your simple campaigns, working on a project with them. In fact, my encouragement and opportunity for you is to recommend that you work with industry now where you can. Just reach out to them. Many of them don't bite or won't, like, come back nasty to you and say, I've got an opportunity. And it could be just a simple thing. Maybe, like I watch a bit of Korean K-drama and I see, brands or shops like fried chicken come to some of these campaigns, and I say, why don't you work with a restaurant or hotel on a particular social media or Instagram campaign and get them to partner you, and that you can then learn with some of these as well. So what you found, how your campaign has actually enhanced their outputs or sales or marketing, because in a time like COVID, I think it's a wonderful experimental setting to work with them on this as well. So that's probably a long answer to you, but I think, you know, you have to be able to create the opportunities because, like yourself, there are hundreds, if not thousands of students graduating at the same time, and the job market's only, you know, that big. So you want to be able to leverage on your opportunity.
Okay.
Thank you for
Okay,
the
good.
answers.
Thank you.
And next.
Hi, Professor Aron.
Hi, Yim-Suk. How are you?
Yes, thank you for your great presentation. I just have a simple question to ask. It could be somewhat stupid to you, but it's very interesting for me having experience in smart tourism is because I have my past academic experiences only in business. And now I look at the curriculums that's providing by the universities regarding smart tourism. I think that I feel like these curriculums could be taught in the business schools as well. And now I see the transitions is coming in where the specialties and the skill sets in the requirements in smart tourism is not that different than what the business school has been taught. So as you mentioned, the curriculums in different universities in global dimension, do you also see the frames and the work or skill sets are kind of eroding and coming into just one big set where the data is becoming more important and analysis skills are becoming more important? Do you feel the same as how I feel about the smart tourism?
Yeah, and you're absolutely spot on to a certain trend, is especially in the business schools, where many of our curriculum are revised based on institutional standards or industry stakeholders who provide feedback for us. In Australia, we have a process called peer evaluation or external peer evaluation. So, for example, at the Sunshine Coast, I take my curriculum and I give it to someone else, another university, to evaluate, and they give me their curriculum. And you're right, the core subjects of finance, of human resource, marketing, and IT and economics are there. And then there is the disciplinary differences, I suppose, where some of you, like in Gyeonggi or many others, have smart tourism. And that reflects, I guess, the importance of some of these contemporary changes as well. But even in that space, even with a title like smart tourism, as we've seen in the set of slides, the content is quite similar. There's a bit of convergence in there: digital literacies, data analytics, and so on. What I'm trying to get a change of, I guess, culture here is to get people who have a relevant discipline in my kind of topics and ask them if they are able to share from their skill sets that are quite different to the business school. So, for example, we're doing some research on TikTok. And when you look at TikTok as a platform, it's very short. It's 30 seconds, 90 seconds. And I'm looking at the video and I'm asking myself, well, what exactly am I looking for? Because I have no training in visual methods. But that's quite important now, especially in smart tourism futures. How do I analyze a dance, an object, a figure, a photograph, a short video, a microblog? And so just pairing up with people, and I suppose I'm in an environment where I have people who are from creative industries. So they are the people who look at media studies. They can now come into my course and do a workshop with my students on visual methods, because I'm not in any position to teach visual methods. I'm still reading books and getting acquainted to this. So I think where you can complement your curriculum or your training with certain skill sets, that's going to be a big plus, because industry are now asking, well, I know TikTok, I've put videos on TikTok. Now, what in the world am I going to do with them? Because I have no idea with what I'm looking for. And that's the beauty of things right now, that we are working in a very collaborative space to reach out to industry or other academics, even around the world. Some of them are based in the UK or in another context to do that for me. I think in Korea, and Young-Suk, I should emphasize this as well. I think being able to speak more than one language is already a plus. you now have access to Korean or English or another language, and I see a very multinational classroom here. If I can emphasize the beauty and the richness of analyzing your content in your own native language and English, and showcasing that cross-cultural understanding, I think smart tourism has really ticked many boxes, because many of us talk about smart tourism in English, but I understand, having grown up in a very multinational and linguistic environment, translational differences open up a whole world altogether. So that's, for me, the beauty of where we can go with this.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor.
So that's why we need to learn from other disciplinary, which means interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary or multi-method or sort of things. But however, at least we need to focus on our core skill set. Beyond the core skill set, is how to make a deal with other partners.
And you're right. I think the project's now starting to open up more, because smart tourism is globally applied, and how we then, look at our core fundamental approaches and say, okay, who we need to actually bring on board to complement that as well.
Yeah. At least I want to add this stuff. Smart tourism, we starting about 7 years ago, but definition of a smart tourism is evolving continually, and boundary of smart tourism is changing to the more other areas, and other areas are jumping to the tourism context with their skill set. So you guys, if you want to survive in tourism market, you must learn some computer language and other analytics skills as well. Yeah, because they learn tourism.
Of course, and I think as I prepare for this and talk about workforce, which is an area that is thinking about succession planning, I fear, my concern is for the industry, that because of the pandemic and recent events, many of them are giving up their tourism businesses because they don't see the future, or it's just too hard for them. Small, medium enterprises in Korea or everywhere else. My hope is that through the kind of processes that we put in place for succession planning and the skill sets, we have a viable future, because I'm asking that questions myself to my cohort of students, and I ask them, how many of you see yourselves in tourism workforce in 10 years? And only a handful sometimes put their hands up. And I say, why is that the case? And they say they got a bit scared with what the pandemic has done in terms of the outlook for tourism. And I say, well, surely, in 10 years time here in Brisbane, we're holding the Olympics. There must be some, smart tourism applications and outcomes for you. But many of them don't see that far, and I have to convince parents and even the next generation of high school, which I visit some of the time, why a tourism workforce is important. And for them, the narrow understanding, and maybe even in your parents' or grandparents' generation, the workforce is very narrowly defined. Either you're a travel agent, your cabin crew, or your hotel waiter. I think that has to be debunked as well. I think the beauty of the tourism workforce today is that you are able to use some of these new emerging tools to support you. A few years ago in Brisbane, we had the National Science Week. I met a 16-year-old girl from the US, and I said to her, what's your job? She says, I'm a space archaeologist. I said, what do you mean? She says she can look into space, and with her memory that she's got, create everything in space objects on 3D printing with her photographic memory.
Yeah.
So she's using these big objects and data to be able to leverage a career, and places like NASA would obviously be interested in some of the work that she's doing because of her skills. So, for me, that's the kind of future I want to encourage you to create your own future and workforce as well, because it's not just cabin crew or theme parks or hotels that we're talking about. Now, many of you will go into workforce that I don't even have the words to describe what work that you do into the future.
So actually, when I was a college student, they never used the internet keywords. The internet never existed at that time. Even smart tourism, no, at all.
Yeah. I think even when I finished my first degree, my dad asked me, engineering students study to become engineers, nursing students become nurses. What do tourism students study to become? and he joked like, do you become a tourist? I said, what do you need to study to become a traveler? And through some of the jobs and some of the learnings as well, I think we learn a lot in that space to create the kind of workforce and the smartness of the skills that we need as well. So I'm looking at many of you one day to become, you know, some of the leaders of tomorrow, and maybe even informing some of these outcomes as well. And there will be obviously the big businesses, but if you think of the recent disruptors, and many don't like that word, I like the example of, if you look at Airbnb, the business came about because two people who were students, who were very poor, and looked at the opportunity to have an air bed in their room for a conference across the road, and sold it for $20. Today, they are well worth in excess of $20 billion in the US stock market.
I want to mention it. This one, interface. Interface is a face and face inter. So like here, all students are Koreans or some of the foreign students. Anyway, you need got to the interface between interdisciplinary, or like a Vietnam and Korea, or the or Denmark, Korea. There is an interface, or Australia and Korea interface. So like interface skill, interaction skills is important. You need to understand the other side. Yes, interface. Like someone who worked for airline company for 10 years. Probably they got their own knowledge of that domains. But if they know the smart tourism, probably that service section is linked to the smart tourism, and they create another area based on that, the multidisciplinary knowledge and expertise. So that's the need in interface. Without interface is how to communicate with each other. Okay, other students? Look, this is a great chance to talk with Aron, Tham. Well, practice your English. Why not? You know, I still use broken English, but I proudly say whatever.
Your English is good, Jomo. Trust me.
As good as you?
No, I think I also, I guess, writing and speaking as well, it's not the same. And I think for me, just a passion about writing, and I write about any topic that I want. Smart tourism was one of these. But I want to encourage you, all these students, Chumu, are they all undergraduate, postgraduate?
Yeah, graduate student.
Graduate students, okay. Yeah, so the opportunity here is to obviously disseminate your work elsewhere in a way that's understandable, micro blogs, LinkedIn, and so on. You reach out to businesses, and you'd be surprised where they reach out to. Are you teaching now online or in person as well?
Online.
Oh, fully online. Okay.
Fully online.
So the students are literally anywhere in the world. Oh, it's a very global classroom. Yeah.
This is actually a real global class. And we inviting the faculty and students like you from all over the world. So it's a kind of one very great chance to build up your personal relationship through this class. It's true. You know, it's a funny thing is like one of my colleagues, she worked with James Patrick, the chief editor of the JIT, Journal of Travel Research, which is top tier journal. Actually, I invited him last a couple of weeks ago. She contacted him, you know, by email, and now he's starting his whole work with him because of this, you know, the communication and the channels. So, you know, so aggressively approach you need. Never give it a chance to hesitate. Hesitate is you throw it. Hesitate. Who like hesitate person? Nobody.
Yeah, I think it's right. I think Prof. Koo has got a point that because of the internet, many people are drawn closer through this kind of digital distances. I had the privilege, and this is definitely an opportunity, and thank you for this to share with the students. I've taught in a few different countries over the pandemic online, and many of them, I was told, would be only about 60 students in the classroom. I entered that room once, and there were like 250 students, and I thought this is quite unusual. What's going on? Some of them have heard about it, traveled almost 80 kilometers to their friend's house so that they can get on the internet to attend the class. And I thought, gee, here we are complaining about internet speeds very slow. They have to travel 80 kilometers to go and attend the class in their friend's house. And I said, if they have the dedication to teach, I think it's good. I think, you know, you've got a curriculum and a way now to reach them. And if you want to add me on Facebook or on LinkedIn, by all means, I think go ahead. I can only do so much, and eventually later on, many of you take your own careers your own way. But I thank you again for spending your last 2 hours with me, unpacking some of these insights, and I'll obviously share the slides with Prof. Koo and the Mentimeter one, which is quite interesting because I do that with different cohorts, and
I will share it is Facebook.
Cool.
which is up-to-date information from our audience, how they think about the smart tourism. Never before.
Okay.
It's just created information by you.
All right.
And I instantly using it and bringing attention from all over the world. Hey, this is what we are now doing. So
it'll be interesting to compare that with industry and academics perceptions too. I think. Interesting.
Never ever hesitate. It's agile and flexible, and try it, fail, and try again. Okay. I want my students to more actively, proactively approach to your, everything's project, life, whatever.
I think next time, if I do get a chance to visit some of you in Korea or something, I do a bit different in the classroom. I bring those of you who have played this toy called Lego. My classroom, once in the semester, I have a Lego week. So I give them the Lego bricks, like hundreds of them. And I say to the students, take a few of these bricks and create like the smart tourism future through Lego. And I'm just blown away by some of the designs that they use with Lego. Some of them have fun building a hotel room or a waiter robot and all. It's just fascinating stuff. So I can't unfortunately do that on Zoom. It's very hard. I tried it once and it's very hard
to.
One
we
day.
Never met before the Aron.
Yes.
And we just met through the email and then talk. And why don't you come to our class?
I will. One day. Thank you. And I think I'm waiting to travel.
So sooner or later you will come. So
yes, I will.
So And one last question from it's amazing. It's amazing. But anyway, Aron, so you were born in England?
Singapore.
Singapore.
Singapore. Yeah.
Wow. And then got a job in Australia.
I did. So long story short, I did my master's and PhD in 2 different institutions in Australia. Towards the end of the PhD, I applied for a job and got it. And my supervisor said to me, you better take the job because the job market's challenging. So I took the job 6 weeks before I submitted my PhD. And I've been here 8 years now. And I think it's opened up my eyes. I'm now obviously involved with different projects like the Olympics in 2032, for example, and that people talk about smart tourism. But yeah, I enjoy going back to Asia. I was thinking back, the last time I was in Korea was 2002 during the FIFA World Cup. So it's been a long time since I've not gone back.
Okay. Okay. Hopefully, I never visited before Brisbane, but the Olympics comes. We let's make a chance.
Yes.
To meet.
Or even before that. Yes, for sure.
Sure. Okay. If I have not any question to him, okay. The Australia. Wow, it's kangaroo country, right?
It is.
Let me point out Alexandrova Liliana. Where are you from?
I'm from Bulgaria.
Bulgaria.
Yes.
It's one of my students in Bulgaria, Pieta. Pieta, you know
Yes,
her?
yes.
Okay. So Bulgaria is a European country. Now,
Right.
now is a war happening next Bulgaria. It's about 300 kilometers from Ukraine to Bulgaria.
Yes.
It's a disaster. So, and who else? So Juyong, you quiet. What do you think about today's lecture? It's a good answer. My mic is not working. So students, you don't want to answer about the professor asking, you say typing like my mic is not working. Okay, Aron, is one last comment from you about smart tourism or about my students or whatever you want to say.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity as well. And for many of you, I guess watching this emerging trend, some of the work that I'm also maybe of interest to you is, and I think Prof. Koo as well, the world of blockchain and cryptocurrencies, Bitcoins, becoming part of the new landscape for digital futures. I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in that space about its legality, about its application in tourism, hospitality and events. So if that's something that you are interested to pursue, by all means, I think it's got very interesting perceptions from industry, and I want to encourage as well for those of you who want to pursue research into that space too.
Okay, very good. I'm learned from him a lot about the smart tourism subject and the boundary of the subject and the frame of smart tourism again. Okay, and please sharing your slide. I will teach to our students about your concept.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I highly appreciate
Have a good day.
your attendance here and then give us very good insight to our students. Look forward to you face to face.
Yes. Have a good day, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
And Aron,
yes.
I'm sorry, I'm busy, teaching around this semester, so I haven't even touched the slide 1. I mean the chapter 1 too.
That's okay.
So, okay, so let's work again. I will starting again with our students, and as soon as I finishing chapter 1 at least, and then sharing it, and then you take a look at it again, and then we send out to the publishers.
Okay, no worries.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.